Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you might be in this fine world. You are listening to the Startup Selling Show, talking sales with Scott Sambucci. That's me. Today's episode is a guest episode, and today's guest is Jeff Bajorek. Jeff works with B2B sales teams to maximize performance by reframing their approach, their selling skills, and their mindset around their purpose. He helps them to rethink the way they sell by reminding them of what needs to be done, showing them how to do it, and then making them believe that they can. When he's not at work, Jeff is an avid golfer and apparently is a pretty good cook because he likes to do lots of cooking for the rest of the family every day. So one of the things that you'll find about Jeff is that he takes a very analytical approach and a very thoughtful approach to sales. I've gotten to know Jeff for the last couple of years, and we've had him on as a guest on the show here before. And it's been a little while, so I thought it'd be a good idea to have Jeff back on the show. A couple of the main topic that we talked about today was what it means to have what's called a closing problem. So those of you who listen to me or you know me from different webinars or trainings or coaching, I'm not a huge fan of the word close because I always feel like, well, are we closing the sale or are we starting a relationship? But for purposes of this podcast, we're going to use the phrase closing the sale. And specifically, what we're going to talk about is how many companies that might work with Jeff, whether it's a sales team, a large company, or founders that work with us here at Sales Qualia. Many times people will come to us and say, look, gosh, we have a closing problem with our sales team. We just got to figure out how to close more deals. Turns out, based on Jeff's analysis and also some things I can corroborate on, in most cases, like 99% of the time, when a team or a salesperson or a founder is having a hard time closing the sale, it's not that they have a closing problem. Is that there's other things earlier in the sales process that are going wrong that's making them feel like they have a closing problem. That's exactly the topic that we're going to talk about today with Jeff. So Jeff he penned a white paper a few years ago about this exact topic. And what he identified in his analysis is that before a team or a company or a founder has a closing problem, there's actually 16 other parts of the sales process or other gaps that a team or a company or a salesperson might have that is actually the inhibitor as to why someone can't close the sale. And so in this episode, we talked quite a bit about that topic. And specifically, we talked about two of those 16 different areas of the sales process where most companies need to work on before they worry about whether or not they can or cannot close sales better. So that was a big part of our conversation. As we kicked off with Jeff, one of the things we did talk about a little bit just about the psychology of selling and how many times, whether it's a salesperson, it's been a professional for many years, or specifically for many of you who listen, that you are perhaps a startup founder who is doing the selling for your company or leading your sales team. Many times as salespeople or as founders, we may have the tendency to feel like we need to act a certain way. And in some cases, may act in a way that's incongruent to who we are as people or how we might want to communicate with our prospect or how we might want to communicate with another human being altogether. And I know from my experience, a lot of times when I speak with early stage founders that might have a technical background or product background, they'll even say, I don't want to act like a salesperson. And as we dig into that, what we realize is nobody should be acting like anyone. We should just be ourselves. And so this is something Jeff has thought a lot about as well. And so the first 10 or 15 minutes of our conversation just talks a lot about that psychology that we need to have as a seller and what it means to truly communicate and develop a relationship with our buyers so that both sides are open, they're honest, they can trust each other, and really dig into the real reason why we might be having that sales call or running that product demo or speaking with that prospects team. So those are the two main topics that we talked about. I think you're really going to like the show. As always, the show is brought to you by me and Scott Sambucci, founder at Sales Qualia. In a couple of minutes, I'll tell you a little bit more about how you might look to get some help from the team and me, including a live event that we're going to be running in April of 2023. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next few minutes. In the meantime, let's kick off in my conversation with Jeff Bajorek. Jeff, welcome to the program.
No, it's good to be here, Scott. Always good to talk to you. It's been like too long, and I know we rescheduled this a couple of times. And you know, every once in a while, you'll be able to catch me on a Friday evening, and the time zones kind of work against us sometimes. But I've been looking forward to reconnecting with you for a while. So this is it's good to be in this seat again.
Well, I appreciate that very much and your patience in terms of getting the spot right for you and for us on getting you back on the show. So it's good to have you back. You're now a two-time guest, which is it says a lot about you and what the folks listening to are going to be getting out of the time that we've got together today. Like I'd like to ask everyone, and maybe for folks, especially if they haven't heard the first episode, when I ask you, like, hey, when people ask you, Jeff, like, what is it that you do every day, or what do you do? Describe what you do. How do you answer that question?
For a long time, that was a difficult thing for me to answer, right? I mean, because I know the sales process. I know what selling is. I know it better and in a different way than a lot of people do, but it's sometimes hard to put that into words. But one of the things that I've been working on recently is exactly that. And marketing is as much of an important part of sales as actually understanding the sales process is. But I work with sales organizations and I help them to improve by kind of uncovering the deep-seated roadblocks that people put in front of themselves. And once you understand what those are, you can negotiate them, get around them, and actually, in some cases, make them work for you. So I really bring a coaching approach to my consultation and help people to verbalize, out loud some of the things that they've been afraid to say for a long time. And it's a funny thing that happens when you start to tell the truth about what's really holding you back, you can actually make some progress. So in some ways, I help sales organizations tell the truth about what's holding them back. And that helps them get to where they need to go.
Wow, man. Sounds like you and my therapist are good friends. But it probably feels that way for a lot of sales organizations, big and small. And I know just working with startup founders, a lot of times they have their own roadblocks that are just keeping them down or holding them back or preventing them from moving to the place they want to get to. And sometimes it is a little bit like therapy. Obviously, neither of us are licensed therapists, but
right.
Like it's really what it comes down to is like asking questions to people that may not have even heard that question before. And through expertise like you have, through the decades of experience you have selling, that's where it sounds like you're able to identify, okay, you have this blocker, you have this obstruction, you got this thing, whether it's a small pebble or a big rock that's getting in the way or slowing you down or stopping you. And that's sometimes what the clients need is just to get somebody to ask them the right questions because they don't necessarily know what exactly is holding them down.
Well, I had this happen to me. It's funny how things come full circle sometimes, but it was probably 6 years ago. I was working with a client and she looked at me and it was over Zoom. And I remember, and she looked at me, she said, Jeff, are you a sales coach or a life coach? And I said, why does there have to be a difference? Now, I'm not a life coach. I don't have the certification. My wife is a certified life coach. Like she knows the stuff about, the bigger things holding people back. And she does tremendous work helping people unlock, their own potential. But, I think sales and life are so closely intertwined. And one of the things I think that holds salespeople back is trying to keep those things separate. It's not just a work-life balance, work-life integration thing. The way we treat people on a day-to-day basis is very, very similar to sales processes. It's very, very similar to the way we interact with our prospects, our customers. Everybody out there has some way that we can probably help them, right? But it still comes down to, are you helping them in a way that no one else can help them? Are you helping them in a way that you want to help them? Are you helping them in a way that they actually need the help right now? But I think maybe I'm just a little jaded. Maybe this is my psychosis, but I think that anytime you ask someone to do something for you, you are making a sales call. And anytime they do it, you've made a sale that makes them your customer. And if we started treating people like they were our best customers or potentially our best customers, I think we would listen better. I think we'd agree to disagree more often. I think we'd be a lot more civil. I think we'd know a lot more about each other. I'm not going to say that we'd all get along because there's still plenty to disagree about. But I just think that if we were not so afraid to separate those two topics, and we thought about all the interlocking and overlap and interaction that there are between those two concepts, and I think we'd get a lot more done, and I think we'd be better for it.
Yeah, and it's funny because I think if you also treated your prospects the way you would treat friends with a level of respect and ask hard questions sometimes, just like if I got a friend that's struggling with something and I'm like, hey, I'm going to ask you a question that's kind of hard, but I feel comfortable asking you because I'm your friend. Like that's where I think a lot of salespeople might be unwilling to ask a hard question because they're worried about what's this person going to think about me, or like how are they going to react or respond to this question. And so I kind of like that framework is that, how you are as a person is how you're going to be as a salesperson as well, and vice versa.
And the problems that we encounter all happen when we try to be someone other than who we are. Anytime you try to step out of your own authenticity, your own integrity, and be someone else, that's when we run into problems.
Yeah.
And the fact of the matter is, salespeople are afraid to let people down, right? The biggest insecurity salespeople have is that they're going to say that they did something or that they were going to do something, and they're going to let somebody down, their manager, their colleagues, their customers, their prospects, whatever that is. And so in order to not let anybody down, we water ourselves down in the process to, try to do it the way other people do it. And we end up with this, diluted version of mediocrity and then we try to tell ourselves that that's okay. The whole thing, when people do it wrong, the whole thing's a lie. And that's why it doesn't feel good. And that's why people are so emotional about it. And to where, a lot of times they're doing it wrong. They're going against their integrity. It feels weird. They don't like it and they don't know why. And they're afraid to do the mirror work, like I call it, of actually self-examining and wondering, okay, is this really who I am? If it's not, then why am I so afraid to be who I am? And that just becomes too messy. I've been there. Scott, you and I talked about this. This is where I spent a lot of time, last fall, doing my own kind of soul searching as it relates to this. And what it comes down to, and like this is the reason that I said it at the top of the show, is salespeople are afraid to tell the truth about who they are and who they need to be, or who they think they need to be, rather. And they have a difficult time reconciling that difference. So instead of doing the work to reconcile that difference, they just keep telling the lie because it's easier. And it's with intentions and everything.
Yeah. 100%. Because like I was thinking, like, as you're talking through that concept, Jeff, like when we work with startup founders, for example, one of the reasons that startup founders don't like even the idea of selling is because they don't like how other people have sold to them.
Yeah.
And as prospects, from the salesperson that's trying to, bang them over the head on email or text messages or LinkedIn or whatever, they're like, it's doesn't like, I'm just tired of this, like, unempathetic, non-personalized, just like batch and blast, or I can tell on the other end of the Zoom, the salesperson isn't really listening to me. They're trying to tell me what I want to hear instead of just answering questions about whether or not the product can do the thing I need them to do. And so they're absorbing all of that as the way that they think that the way sales is supposed to happen, like, because that's the experience they have as being sold to. And so when I talk to them or we start working with them and they have this sort of like feeling about sales, like, I don't want to do sales. I don't want to be that kind of person. And it's because their only observed behavior is the wrong behavior. So they have this misconception of what it means to be a salesperson or what it means to sell in the first place. So we, a lot of times, have to sort of like bring them back and say, well, why did you start the company? Like, what is the problem that you saw in the market? Like, who do you really want to help? Mm-hmm. And you get them talking about those things and you see them light up. Oh, and you see them get excited. And I'm like,
so good.
That's how you sell. You tell that story. You ask those questions. You explain to your prospects why you started the company and who you want to help and why you want to help them. That's how you sell. And then it's like their heads explode. They're like, oh my God, are you serious? Like, I can do that?
Yep.
So I think your point is just creates a sort of negative spiral when people are not being genuine and they're not being themselves.
Yeah, they say, oh, I don't want to be that person. And I say, don't be. It's
you don't have to be
simple. It's well, I mean, can I follow them on social media? Can I, send them a message on Twitter, or can I contact them directly on LinkedIn? And is that creepy? I'm like, well, if you don't want to be creepy, don't be creepy. I think where the line is, and it doesn't have anything to do really with whether or not you sent them a message. The context of the message, the actual text of the message, how often you sent that message, is there value to that message? Like, prospecting is one of those things that should underscore your desire to solve a problem they have. And if it comes across to them like you're genuinely trying to help, and not just because you're putting some flowery language in your messaging that says you love helping people, it's like, do you understand the problem I have? Can you put it in simple enough terms to actually demonstrate that you do understand it? And do you have some insights, demonstrable insights that I can see from your social media following, I can see from your blog, I can see from your website, and are you persistent enough for me to know that this means something to you? I hate that people mistake prospecting for being a pest, because the frequency of your messaging, the duration of your messaging has nothing to do with whether or not you're a pest. It all has to do with the value of your messaging. And if that messaging is valuable, and if that messaging demonstrates some insights and a willingness to help, like I went through, yep, that's worth persisting, with. And that's how you actually help people. And the data's there. You get better and more response when you persist longer. But if you don't persist well with value, well, yeah, then people get really turned off. They feel like you're wasting their time. And then all of a sudden, you're being that person you didn't want to be. And there aren't enough people looking into exactly why stuff works. And instead, it's easier to just grab someone's playbook or buy someone's template or here, pay $99.95 for my online course, and I'll show you everything to say and how often to say it. And it's like, if that were really the way to do it, let's say there were 5 ways that everybody could do it, and then everybody did it that way or those 5 ways, like that would still be the definition of mediocrity. Like people realize that, right? Like just because it might be a little bit better than what you're getting right now doesn't mean that it's not. It doesn't mean that it's going to be the best that you can do. And it's not until you step outside of someone else's blueprint that you realize that what you bring to the table, and only you bring to the table, is the key to your success. That is your secret sauce. And you will never be as good as you can be until you embrace that. And that requires some of that hard work that we've talked about already. But man, we're 10 minutes into this discussion. We haven't even started talking about what I know we were supposed to talk about today. So
no, this is good because I think it's I hopefully for people listening, it kind of gets their gears grinding a little bit about maybe the last email that they sent or the last batch of emails they might have sent out, or how they might have interacted with somebody at a conference, or their hesitation around sending a text message as a follow-up to somebody they've talked to. Or thinking about what I should be doing in an email or on LinkedIn, and just saying, okay, well, maybe I should, as you like to say, rethink the way you sell. And so if anything, it gets people sort of thinking about this and giving them permission to act as themselves, as opposed to acting like a salesperson. Then that in itself, I think, is good advice for everyone.
Yeah.
So let's talk about kind of the main topic that you and I talked about. And it's related to how you introduced yourself, which is guiding sales teams and people to overcome what's holding them back. And you and I first started this conversation last year, at the end of last year. So it's been a few months. And it kind of came up just like haphazardly a little bit, where I was starting to talk about how so many, whether it's like founders that come to us for our program, or I see a lot of whether LinkedIn posts or sales advice, and it's like, how to close the sale. Here's the things you got to do to close the sale. And I think the way it came up with us is like, I'm like, God, like, it feels like whenever we work with a team or a founder, it's like, they don't have a closing problem. They have like, sometimes it's a prospecting problem, or it's a qualification problem, or it's some other kind of problem. And you just lit up as soon as I said that when we were talking, and you're like, I got something for you. So maybe I'm going to like sort of set the stage for kind of describe a little bit about how you've thought about this concept of like, you don't have a closing problem, and then we'll take the conversation from there.
I wrote a white paper, actually. People still write those, I guess. Maybe not anymore. Maybe I was the last one to do it. But I wrote a white paper in 2019 because I had so many people come to me saying, Jeff, my team needs closing help. Or I'd have people say, I just can't close a deal. Like, I don't understand. Can you help me close more deals? And I said, yeah, but you probably don't have a closing problem. And they said, what do you mean? I said, well, how well do you open? How well do you build rapport? How well, how good is your messaging? What's your plan? How good is your process? And I sat down and I figured I was onto something, because I kept listing these things off. And so I sat down and I came up with 16 other problems that people have that will help them close the sale. And the thing that people, and maybe it's just the way I see it, I'm not alone in this, but I think we're certainly in the minority. Like presenting, or the actual sales part, what most people consider to be the selling part, the convincing part, that should be the shortest part of your sales process. If you do it right, it's really just a recommendation. It's based on how you've described the issues you're trying to resolve, and knowing my approach for resolving issues like yours. This is what I think we should do. Does that make sense? That's the presentation, right? I believe if you do it right, that's the presentation, right? Yeah. You can fill in your own blanks. Closing is the same thing. Well, okay, this is what I think we should do. Does that make sense? Yes. Okay. When do we start? Like that's the closing part. But that's because you have properly set those 16 other puzzle pieces down and you know exactly where to put that last piece. And so if the sales process or the whole sales environment that I'm laying out here is a jigsaw puzzle, and you can picture that on your desk in front of you, right? You've got 17 pieces, which is a really weird number for a jigsaw puzzle, I know, but just go with it, right? And so the closing piece, that's the last part. Well, obviously, if you put all the other 16 pieces in, you know exactly where it goes. You know the orientation, you know the location, etc. But if you just have 17 puzzle pieces in front of you and I hand you the closing one and I say, okay, put this exactly where it goes and don't have it upside down, don't have it rotated 90 degrees, put it exactly where it's going to go. And then, maybe you can build a couple of other pieces around it so you have an idea. How much more difficult is it to get that right? Well, it's damn near impossible, which is what selling feels like today. So when you build the proper foundation, when you open correctly, when you engage properly, when you do great discovery, when you ask good questions, which is different than doing discovery, very closely related, but there are differences there. All of these things on down the line, now all of a sudden you've made the closing part easier. And so again, it's kind of like, there's something that we need to do, and really every seller needs to do. Sometimes when your prospect tells you they need something, you need to give them what they're asking for, but at the same time also give them what they need, right? Like, let me validate your ask because it means something and it's real. But at the same time, are you seeing the glaring hole over here that is leading to all your problems? That's, I think, what I'm trying to do here for people, because closing, well, that's the sexy part, right? Coffee's for closers. There's a lot of people drinking coffee, don't close very many deals, right? And so it gets all the attention, and it's really, if you do it right, it's almost an afterthought. It's never an afterthought because you have to actively participate in it. But if you do it right, it should fall into place.
Well, as you're describing all this, Jeff, I'm thinking back to, when I was selling enterprise software and other big engagements. If you're doing the rest of the sales process and it's a 3 or 6 or 12-month or longer sales process, selling 6-7 figure deals, by the time you get to the point of the decision, it's almost anticlimactic. It's almost like, yeah, we know we're going to get this sale. We just need to wait for these final checklists coming in from procurement. Then it's going to go to legal, where we're going to have some red lines, but we've already talked through it already with the business team. And we know we're going to get started in January. And the probability of that is like 90%. Like, there could be some landmines in procurement, or there could be something from the legal team we didn't expect. But it's almost like, like I know. It's like we get the phone call and it's less of like the fist pump, like, oh, we won, we finally got it. Not because we weren't sure, but it was almost like relief. Like, okay, all the work we put in to get to this point is now over. And now we can get started with the actual implementation.
Right.
So it was less like winning the lottery and more of like, okay, finally the work that we put in with this client is paying off. And now we get to get started with the engagement. That's the excitement piece. If you're doing those other 16 pieces of the puzzle, right?
Right. And in a way, it's disappointing that it's anticlimactic, right? I mean, it's never anticlimactic when you cash the check. Like that part's always worth looking forward to. Let's be real.
That's when I start to worry.
Well, right.
I'm like, that's when I start thinking about the renewal. I'm like, how do we make this happen again?
Well, and not sometimes not even the renewal, sometimes the onboarding, right? You're like, okay, so once that money's yours, now it's like, oh man, you start thinking about ways they could take it away from you. And you hope that those kind of things don't come up.
Right.
Now it's like, don't screw it up, right? But, that ties into something else I say though, Scott, and that's, you focus on a process and you get results, but when you focus on results, you get frustrated. And so the results, you want the results to be anticlimactic sometimes, and sometimes it's hard to celebrate, because if you're winning regularly, then you start to expect it, and it's harder to celebrate those things, which is, another podcast for another time. How do we reward ourselves appropriately?
We call those champagne problems.
Right. But you want it to just be another step in the process. You want to see more perspective. You want each one of those steps to be meaningful, and you don't want to ever keep, take your eye off the ball. But there are all these things that need to be done. And as soon as you close one, you got another one to open. And, it's important to take time to celebrate and congratulate yourself and pat your teammates on the back and all that other stuff. But it's also important that we keep our eye on the prize to continue to move forward, because it's the little steps along the way that help make this gig and this environment much more consistent and sustainable, and not so high with the highs, not so low with the lows. That's an important part to keep. That perspective is more important than I think a lot of people give credence to.
Well, let's get a little more detailed here. So you've got these 16 puzzle pieces that need to be in place before you get to the 17th. Let's pick one or two as a starting point, just to give some folks some really specific examples around, and something that might be perceived like they might think, oh, we got to close more deals, but actually there's one of the 16 things that need to happen first. So what are like one or two of the top ones that you see for most companies, especially if we think about like early stage, growth stage founders and their early sales teams that may not have somebody like you with 20 years of experience in enterprise sales? They're just trying to like understand how to build that first version of their sales process. What's the top one or two that come to mind for you if you're going to teach somebody like, this is actually the core issue, not closing?
The big issue, and this encompasses like three of these pieces that I can think of just off the top of my head here. The big issue is tension. And what I say is, if there's no tension, there's no sale.
All right, folks, we're off and running with Jeff Bajorek, and we're talking a little bit about mindset and what it means to communicate and what it means to be one's self when it comes to selling, and how to represent yourself, represent your company, and have the prospect's best interest. These are just like some core fundamentals when it comes to selling, and that's what we do every day here at Sales Quality. Is we help early stage founders, growth stage companies selling to the enterprise get some of those fundamentals in place, get some of the sales processes in place. And further, beyond the webinars and the trainings and all of the stuff that we're always posting on LinkedIn, one of the things we wanted to do is offer a live event, an in-person, real life event. So in April of 2023, if you're listening to this podcast after that, sorry, we might be able to help you out some other way. But if you're listening to this podcast now, coming up in just a couple of weeks' time, we're going to be running a live event in Chicago. And in Chicago, what we're going to be doing is partnering with Amy Volas over at Avenue Talent Partners. Amy's company and our company are going to be co-hosting a 2-day live event in person, in real life, immersive experience. And it's designed to be a transformative event for startup founders that want to work on building a repeatable, scalable sales process, and also want to build a hiring system, a hiring process, so that those founders can find the right sales talent, the right sales leadership that will in fact help them implement and grow that sales process. I would share all of the details with you if you just go over to salesqualia, QUALIA.com/Chicago 2023, salesqualia.com/Chicago 2023. All of the details are there, all of the registration links. Hopefully you'll get there before tickets are sold out. We're keeping this event very small, very closed, lots of collaboration with Amy, with me, with our team, with founders, the other founders that you're going to be joining. It's designed to be an immersive experience, an interactive experience. You're going to be learning from us and learning from each other. So we are keeping this event small, partly because of the venue and partly because we want this to be an intimate experience where everybody's engaging and everyone's learning together. So if you want to learn more about this, go over to salesqualia.com/Chicago 2023. All the details there. And we hope to see you in Chicago. All right, back to my conversation with Jeff Bajorek.
And tension is that group of emotions that is responsible for anybody doing anything, right? That's where your motivation comes from. And, traditionally, a lot of salespeople have been taught to find and create pain and exploit pain and find those pain points and dig in and just make it uncomfortable. I'm not that sadistic. I don't like doing that. I also realize that people buy stuff for feel good reasons too, right? Nobody buys a Rolex because they need to know what time it is. They buy it because of the way it makes them feel. Nobody buys a Mercedes because they need a ride to work. They buy a Mercedes because of the feeling, the experience they get every time they sit in that vehicle. And so there are good reasons that go along with those uncomfortable reasons, but to lump it all together as discomfort or pain, I think is too short-sighted. So I call that group of emotions tension. And specifically, when I think about these puzzle pieces, I think about engagement, I think about discovery, and I think about questioning.
Okay, so let me just slow down here for a sec. So engagement, discovery, and questioning were the three.
Mm-hmm.
These are three categories where a sales team or a salesperson or a founder that's doing sales, they need to create tension in each of these three.
these are the three, I guess, specific ways that would go under the umbrella of creating tension, right? So am I getting your attention and holding it, right? That's the engagement part. Am I speaking about a problem that you're having? Am I speaking about it with relevance so that it gets your attention? And do I have enough credibility? Am I someone worth talking about? And am I someone worth talking to? And do I have something worth talking about? And are you now engaged with my line of logic? And is this something worth digging into a little bit?
Okay. So how can someone apply tension in each of those as an example?
Great. So someone could apply tension by actually speaking to the problem that the prospect has rather than speaking about the solution that they have. And it's funny, I did a presentation earlier today, a workshop earlier today, and I asked all the people in the room, there are about 65 people in the room. I said, okay, what are the problems you solve? And these were different companies from, all over the place. It was a kind of a general audience kind of thing. And in the Zoom, they're dropping these things. We help companies do this. We help companies do this. And I said, that's not the problem they're having. That's your solution. And it's like, I remember talking to an SEO company and they helped small businesses, particularly food trucks, with their SEO so that when you pull up Google Maps or Apple Maps or whatever, and you're looking for tacos on a Tuesday, and you find the taco truck that's within 3 miles of your house. You don't get sent to other places, right? And I said, so what's the problem you solve for these taco trucks? He said, well, we help them with your SEO. I said, that's not a problem. He said, oh, I get it. SEO is complicated, so we make it easier for them to address. And I said, nope, that's not a problem. He said, well, how about, and I said, hold on, I'm going to stop you there. Here's the problem. The problem is if I want a taco because it's Tuesday and I look it up in my map, I don't find your truck. Your problem is that when I'm looking for you, I can't find you. Now, the way you help is through SEO. Okay. But if you come to me, if I come to you, Scott, we'll role play this. If I come to you and I say, Scott, I know you have a taco truck and SEO is really important. We help taco trucks like yours with their SEO so that they can be found more readily. Right?
Yeah.
Okay. That's one prospecting message. It's not that bad. It talks kind of to the problem you're having, but speaks more to the expertise I have. Instead, if I said, Scott, you got a problem. You got a taco truck that nobody knows about. I've got 3 ideas that'll help you boost your SEO right now with no charge, no cost. This is just insights for you. And there's plenty more where that came from. Is it worth sitting down for 15 minutes to talk about how you might be able to be found more often? I'm going to leave you with this stat, but people in your area code search for taco trucks 100 times a day. I'll let you do the math on what your average ticket size is.
Yeah.
But those are 2 different responses. And you could argue that the second one's maybe a little wordy for an email, but
the concept, it's like, look, you got this taco truck, you set it up on a Tuesday. And maybe you get a rush at 5 o'clock, or maybe you get a rush at at noon. But what about those other 3 hours that the taco truck is open from 1 to 4? Yeah. And you've got a worker in there sitting idle. You're paying for that space. You're paying for the power. And meanwhile, in that space between 1 and 4 o'clock, there's 100 people that have been searching for tacos every day, every Tuesday, within 3 miles.
Yeah.
Like, what if your problem is you've got this taco truck sitting here and it's sitting idle? Like, what if you instead, you don't need a long line, but what if you could, average 1 order for every 3 minutes?
If we know that 100 people search for you, let's say you only picked up half of that. So now 50 people come to your taco truck. Average ticket size is $15. You're leaving $750 a day on the table. That's probably covering the space, probably covering the power, it's probably covering the labor. It's probably covering, it's and then on top of that, everything else that you got at the lunch rush and the dinner rush is gravy, right?
Yeah. He's So I love how you're thinking about this. It's like, hey, we're going to improve your traffic in the dead times so that the dead times pay for your truck so that everything else you do is just piles of cash.
Yeah. I mean, how many ways? I mean, and you and I are just batting ideas around.
Yeah, totally.
Partially because we're good at this, but these are just ideas that are popping into our head right now. But the whole thing is, let me create so much context right away because it's in terms you easily understand and feel every day. Now, my messaging hits. And I think the problem that most salespeople have, particularly with their outreach, is they try to be too clever. They're trying to be funny. And the thing about clever is it's at like a 12th grade reading level. You know what I mean? Like I have an 8th grader and a 6th grader.
Or not. It's in a first grade level.
I mean, they're pretty clever, but you have to speak to your prospects on a very elementary level because it takes a great understanding of a problem to be able to simplify it anyway. But when you can speak in very clear terms, it actually cuts through the noise in a way that everybody else that is trying to be clever can't cut. And so now it's like, no, we can be real here. We can have a discussion about this. And the other part of this is that you want to be talking about the problem itself. People want to talk about the problem. They don't care about your product. So when you come at it from we help people in this way, the irony, Scott, is that guys like you and I trying to make people feel better about selling, tell people, hey, think about how you help people. Selling is helping. Selling is problem solving. Think about how you help people. That's good to get people kind of in the arena, get them feeling better about what they do every day. But at the same time, it's still a seller-centric message. We help people with their SEO. We help taco trucks just like yours with their SEO. No. You have a taco truck that nobody knows about. Stop being the best kept secret. Your problem is that
where the tension kicks in when you like kind of bring it back around, because we got on this start, of course, because we're talking about tension being one of the key attributes here. Well, yeah. Hopefully people aren't listening to this, before dinner.
Here's where the tension comes in. You can have no tension unless you first have connection.
Okay.
And tell me more about that. Connect with me. Okay. So imagine a rubber band. I really, every time I tell this story, it's like, why don't I have just rubber bands on my desk so I can always grab one? But imagine a rubber band. You're holding it in one hand. What happens? The other end falls limp. It's not connected to anything. Grab the other end of your rubber band with your other hand. Now you can stretch it. Now there's tension. You can actually put tension on that rubber band. But until it's connected to something on the other side, there's no tension there at all. So the reason speaking about the problems works or is so necessary is because without connection, there is no tension. Okay. So now when we go back to now I've got your attention, sorry to blend those two terms.
No, it's
now
good.
That I'm holding it, I'm engaging with you, you're engaging with me. Now it's okay, let's talk about this problem. Let's talk about what it's doing to you. Let's get into a discovery conversation here. Let's what are the repercussions of having this problem? What is this doing to your future growth? What do you want this taco truck to be when it grows up? Would you like to have a fleet? Would you like to turn it into a standalone brick and mortar restaurant? Do you want, let's talk about your dreams. Let's talk about your plans. Let's talk about your goals. Now we're creating disparity between where the taco truck owner is now and where they want to be one day. And we can create that tension because the more we can talk about someday, maybe, the more we can illustrate that difference between where they are now and where they want to be. And now we can start to talk about what they need to do to get there. So that is the environment you want to create with discovery. And I think that ties very closely to questioning. But the problem is so many people get discovery questioning wrong because they're using it as some sort of, I hate to say qualification measure, but like it's that they're trying to make sure that this prospect checks all their boxes instead of being concerned with putting that prospect in an emotional state where they want to get where they want to go. All of a sudden we've made it about me again instead of the taco truck. Like that's how you let tension out of the discussion and you shoot yourself in the foot.
So so the way I was interpreting when you just said, Jeff, about qualification versus discovery, it's like as a salesperson, I think I'm doing discovery, but all I'm doing is asking questions that are seller centric. Like, tell me about what CRM do you use? Because I want to know, okay, if they use Salesforce or not, because we integrate well with Salesforce.
Right.
Or how many people do you have in your sales team? You have 50. Okay, good. That means they qualify for enterprise deal pricing. Right. So these are seller centric qualification questions that are more like a checklist to know, is this a person, somebody I could sell to, as opposed to saying, like, tell me more about the shortcomings of the CRM right now, or how long have you had 50 salespeople? Because if you've only had 50 salespeople for the last 2 months, because you ramped up from 20, now listen, maybe that's why we're having this conversation, is because the old CRM isn't working as well as you needed to, because it was good for supporting 20, but not for supporting 50. And so what I'm hearing is like, that's where the tension gets created, because now you're uncovering the problem. The prospect feels in some ways a little bit uncomfortable, but also maybe confident that you're asking the right questions, you understand their business. So while it's not great to be talking about problems, I'm feeling like, okay, maybe there's an endpoint here where the salesperson can maybe relieve some tension by showing me how they're going to help me solve this problem.
I want them to be a little bit uncomfortable. I want them to be confident that they're in good hands. I want them to be inspired that I can help them. And in order to do all that, I have to get vulnerable. I have to get vulnerable first to create the environment where they feel like they can get vulnerable back. And that's something that there's nothing about your procedural questions about how many people have you been, how long have you been in business, how much money do you have, what's the budget, do you have the authority? There's nothing about your procedural questions that make anybody vulnerable and that make anybody in a position where they're more emotionally engaged with the outcome. And here's the thing. You're getting ahead of yourself when you ask those procedural questions because, Scott, I know you've done this long enough and well enough to have had this happen to you more than once. But when you get a prospect to the point where they want to change, they believe you can help, and they believe that they want to move forward with you, they will fill your checklist out for you at the end of that conversation. They're like, wait, you probably need to learn some things, don't you? Oh, okay. Well, yeah. What do you need to know? And then boom, we'll go through it. And it's a procedure at that point, but we can't skip the emotional part to fill out the procedural part. And it's funny, we move that to questioning, and then I'll tie the bow on this little trifecta here, but you have to be willing to ask questions that you don't know the answers to. And you have to be willing to ask questions that they don't know the answers to so that they start thinking differently. And then ultimately, if you're really good at this, you can ask questions that neither of you know the answers to. And it's kind of this moment where you're figuratively wrapping your arm around your prospect and looking off into the horizon. What would it mean if?
Right. Or we should work on this together and get the answers to these questions so we can figure out if or how we can help you.
And now you're going on that journey together, which is where you want them to be. And that's where they want you to be. If you've done this right, they want you to come with them. And that is just it's a side of selling that it's harder to control. It's hard to predict. It's hard to put faith in the humanity of that, right? We're taught that selling's about X's and O's and math, and that we need to be someone that we're not in order to get the procedures right so that the math machine spits out a fair forecast. And it's like, have we forgotten that this is a people business? We've forgotten that this is about emotions. Have we forgotten that this is about connection? Have we forgotten that this is about support and guidance and solving problems in ways that no one else can solve? No. Let's just pick an ICP. Therefore, we don't have to do any discovery. We've got an ICP of 1. You never have an ICP of 1. You can't run a business on an ICP of 1. So,
keep going. Sorry.
So, I mean, just we've tried to math our way out of all the emotional humanity stuff, and you can't do it that way. And I know you want to argue with me.
No, I don't want to argue with it at all, because
the look on your face was like,
no,
I disagree.
I was, and this goes back to something we talked about earlier about like founders being willing to, not follow and try, like, don't try to be the salesperson that you don't like, because that's not how you're going to get the answers to these questions from your prospect. They're not going to trust you if they feel like you're being inauthentic, or if they feel like this is a transactional conversation, as opposed to you like genuinely curious about their situation to figure out if or how you can help them out. And too often what I see when we, especially like we'll bring in a new client, and they, a lot of times they'll have like a pipeline, so-called pipeline of active deals. They're like, okay, I got these 10 deals in the pipeline. I just want to get 3 of them converted by the end of the quarter. Like, that would be really great. And then we go in there and we start investigating each of those deals, and we realize like, actually none of them are active, because none of them are truly qualified, because you haven't done discovery. And so using that word tension, what happens too often for founders and early teams or inexperienced salespeople is like someone, goes to the booth, they're like, beat my badge. If you're lucky and you follow up with them and they say, yeah, I'll see a demo. And then you show them the demo and they're like, this looks great. Can we do a second demo with more people on my team? And you're like, oh my God, this is awesome. We go to the second demo and they say, can you send us a proposal? We're like, yes, we can send you the proposal.
Yeah.
And you're doing all this stuff. And when I go back to that word tension, in that situation, everything's going so great. And everything's just like, oh my God, they want a demo and another demo and a proposal. We're going to get the sale. But all of that time, there never was any tension.
Nope.
Because as the founder or the salesperson, that you never went in and asked, okay, why are we having this conversation? Like, why would, of all of the booths that you visited, you probably got your badge beeped 200 times. Why are we having this meeting? And really, really understanding what's going on there. And that's where the tension gets created. If you don't have that tension, then you're going to be going down this demo mill with these prospects and the proposal, and then chasing them until they finally get back to you next to, at the end of next quarter, like, oh, we don't have budget. And then you're stuck.
You're exactly right. And that's, as soon as that prospect goes dark or doesn't show up to the meeting, you have no recourse as to how to get them engaged again, because you don't know what hooked them the first time. And so when you start the conversation with the problem, you always have the problem to return to. So when they say we can't act right now, when they say we have to disengage for a little bit, when they just don't show up, you go back and it's like, hey, are you still having this issue? And now follow-up becomes a very close cousin to prospecting, except you have more information because you've done some discovery. And now you can more poignantly and more pointedly send messaging, make the phone calls, send the texts, whatever you have earned the right to do. And you can restart those conversations about a problem that is hampering them. So now your follow-up actually has more teeth than your initial prospecting does. And that is something that you give away if you never do good discovery. So when we assume that our customer knows everything they need to know, we give away all our leverage. And when we don't even spot check what it is that they're trying to accomplish, when we just give them all the credit in the world, and oh, by the way, you sell this stuff every day, they buy it once every 5 to 7 years. Who's the real expert here? We know what they think they want, and that's a really good starting place. And I don't ever mean to be disrespectful to any prospect or any customer. I'm sure they think they know what they want, but it's my job, it's my responsibility as the industry expert to make sure they're looking at everything that they should be looking at. My strength comes when I ask them to look at something that they probably haven't looked at that might also overlap with something I do differently and very well. Now I can dictate the terms of the conversation and their motive to buy, which helps insulate me from my competitors because I've made it about something they can't compete with me on. Yeah, that's probably another podcast, Scott. But
it's a good point. The thing you raised too about, your buyers might be buying this kind of solution every 5 to 7 years. And one of the things we stress all the time is your prospects don't know how to buy your product.
No,
because they've never seen anything like it before. No. 10 years ago, when last time they bought a CRM, there was a certain criteria they may have used 10 years ago. But now, 10 years later, they just don't have a mental model for how to evaluate, say, a CRM that integrates artificial intelligence, or they don't have a model to evaluate how to use something that's cloud-based versus local. Maybe that's less of an issue now, but the concept is like, look, you built your product because it is the better mousetrap. No one else has built it before. And so your prospects don't know how to buy your product. And so it's our job, as you said, to ask hard questions, to ask questions maybe they don't know the answer to, or we don't know the answer to, so that you create the tension. And when you create that tension and you can release it by showing them how you're going to solve those problems, now that's where you engage with that prospect at a much higher level.
100%. Couldn't agree more.
Well, dude, we got a couple minutes left. Is there like a second? We just spent like 15 or 20 minutes talking about tension, but I think it's a critical piece. What's like another quick one that somebody could at least start to look at, and then we can share with folks how they can get a copy of this white paper so they can look at the other 14. What's the second one of those 16 that need to happen before closing happens that you find is pretty common, and maybe is like one that's pretty easy for people to implement if they were just aware of it?
Yeah, I'm going to say it, even though it's probably obvious, but you don't have a closing problem. You probably have a pipeline problem. And, when there's no pipeline, every deal that you have left that you think is closable becomes astronomically more important. And then the pressure ratchets up, and that puts you in a position to make bad decisions. It's funny. I make this joke every time I'm playing golf and I have a par 5 and I hit a really good drive. And there's this second hole at my course. And it's like, oh man, I just hit this. I just put myself in position to make a really bad decision. Should I get after this one and try to reach the green in 2, or should I play it safe? Right. And, but when you have no pipeline, man, all of a sudden the pressure's up and now you have to have it. So now you have no leverage. Again, you're giving away leverage. And so you're trying to force something. You maybe act out of character. You ask a question that's a little too pointed. It's rare that you can actually do that. I think people tend to play it too safe when they ask their questions. But when it comes to this, when you put too much pressure on yourself, it just takes you away from doing your best work. So, I mean, the pipe is life. Jeb Blunt's been credited with that, rightly so, for a long time. But it's absolutely true. Like when any deal becomes more important or so important that it changes your behavior, you got to go back and fill that pipe with more deals. Because, and it's not that you don't want to take them seriously, but you need to make sure that it's okay if I lose this, even if I do everything right. Because there are times where you're going to do everything right, you're still going to lose.
Yeah.
So you need to put yourself in a position where when you do enough things right, even as the math plays out, you're still ahead. And people don't equate pipeline with closing, but then as soon as you put it in those terms, it's like, oh, you're right. And then you end up, I have to close this. So you give profit.
Well, that's exactly where my mind's going right now, Jeff, is like, I can imagine. And I've been in this situation myself, especially when I was first starting up this business 10 years ago. Like you want to get your first customers, you want to sort of get like a community rolling and your first 5 or 10 coaching clients. But as a startup founder, for example, you're sitting there and it's the end of Q1 coming up and you're like, man, it's been a slow Q1. The deals that we had at the end of Q4, none of them really developed the way that the prospect promised when they said, ping me in Q1.
Right.
Our prospecting hasn't gone as well as we thought. There's more pressure on the general economics. And now all of a sudden I got a board meeting coming up on the 1st of April and I got to show something to the board. So what do? I'm like, well, we got this one deal. It's probably not even like completely ready to buy. So what am I going to do? I'm going to go in there and offer them a discount. Like, hey, look, if you guys get started before March, we can knock, instead of it being 100K, which I quoted, we'll do it for 60 and we'll do all the implementation for free. And now those people aren't even ready to buy because they still have a few more lingering questions and you're coming at them with a discount. And like you said, like you changed your behavior as opposed to saying, look, we got 3 deals in the pipeline that even if one of them, even if 2 of them don't convert, but this one does, if I get 1 out of 3, I'm good. I don't have to go aggressively after that one offer discount and maybe just blow up the whole deal because it's the only one I have because I have to show the board some traction in Q1.
And you just threw away $40,000 in profit. You just threw away all that implementation money. And you just told your prospect how much you believe in your product, which is a lot less than what you led them to believe to begin with. Right.
Yeah.
And as I've kind of gone through and thought about the way I help people in this capacity versus the way other sales trainers or consultants do, is everything I do comes back to this concept of belief. The sale is made, or the sale begins and ends with belief. You believe you can make it the first time and you believe you can make it again. And if you don't act with full belief and full intention with everything you do, then it's holding you back. That is resistance. That is getting in the way of you doing your best work. And when you tell someone that, I was just kidding, it's not worth that much. It's the end of the quarter. Nothing's worth as much at the end of the quarter as it is at the beginning of the quarter. This is how much I believe that I can justify the investment I've asked you to make. Man, that speaks volumes when you think about it in those terms. And the thing that holds people back is their lack of belief in themselves. And as soon as you tell yourself the truth of, I guess I don't believe in this enough to call the 4th time in a month. I guess I don't believe enough to call someone every 4 business days for a quarter, or call on someone every 4 business days for a quarter. Well, why don't you? And if you don't believe in this, what do you believe in enough to do that? Because we know the data tells us that that's what it takes to reach someone, to make sure that we've actually done enough before we can give up, before they answer us. Like, if you believe in something else enough to do that, then go sell that. Because, we all make choices, right? It all comes back to that at the end of the day. So,
dude, I love it. I know we're running up at the top of the hour here. Yeah. So first of all, if people want to grab that white paper to learn about some of the other specific parts of the sales process. So we talked about tension as being one. And then the second one we talked about was pipeline. Like that's another example that you don't have a closing problem. Where can people get in touch with you and where can people grab a copy of that to learn more on their own?
Sure. jeffbajorek.com/tools. Really simple. It's just my first name, last name.com /tools. There are a bunch of downloads there. just, grab it. You'll get it right away. I think there are a couple of bonus things too that come along. My designer created a cool little infographic with all the doodles and things that she created for this. My graphic designer is so good. Like, I just turn her loose and she comes out with cool stuff. So yeah, that's the best way to get the paper. And then if you have any questions for me, or if you want to reach out, just jb@jeffbajorek.com or through LinkedIn. I'm pretty easy to find.
Yeah, I see you on LinkedIn all the time, which is a good reminder. I'm on the jeffbajorek.com/tools right now. And yeah, there's all kinds of good stuff here. So we'll make sure to put a link to that in the show notes as well. I want to say thanks for making time and being flexible with some of the rescheduling we had to do. So it's really good to have you on the show. And we'll have to do a part 3 sometimes later this year.
You're worth it, Scott. I believe in you. So, we can chop it up anytime you want.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it, Jeff. Have a good rest of your day, man. We'll talk soon.
You too. Thanks.
All right. That's a wrap in my conversation with Jeff Bajorek. If you're digging the show, please do subscribe to it. Tell a friend or 10, leave us a review, do all those things that you can do very simply from your phone right now to let other folks know about the show. We've been putting lots of time and effort into this over the last almost seven years since we did our first episode. We love having guests like Jeff. We love covering topics that we know are going to be helpful for the startup founding community when it comes to sales, growth, scaling their team, scaling their revenue. And the more we hear from you, the more subscribers we get, the more episode downloads that we get, the more that we get jazzed. We want to continue to bring you this podcast. So do make sure that you do that. Tell a friend or 10, leave us a review, subscribe, download the episode, and let us know how we're doing. All right, that's it for now. We'll see you again or talk to you again very soon in the next episode. And for now, this is Scott Sambucci signing off.